She thought Christmas night would end with empty plates and lonely silence, until a frightened little boy wrapped his fingers around hers, and his dangerous father decided she now belonged with them. Before we dive into this story, make sure to subscribe. Christmas night always came with a particular kind of quiet. Not the peaceful kind people talked about in movies, the kind with soft music and glowing windows, and families lingering over dessert. This quiet was heavier, thicker. It settled into the corners of the restaurant and pressed down on anyone unlucky enough to be working the shift no one else wanted. She wiped down the counter for the third time, even though it was already clean. Habit more than necessity. The lights were dimmed to their lowest setting, casting a warm amber glow over empty tables dressed in red linens and untouched place settings. A small artificial tree blinked lazily near the bar, its lights flickering out of sync like it too was tired. 2 more hours, her manager muttered from the kitchen, flipping through paperwork. Then we can lock up and go home to whatever's left of Christmas. She offered a small smile, but didn't respond. She'd learned a long time ago that commenting on loneliness only made it louder. The restaurant wasn't empty exactly. There were always a few on Christmas night, the ones who didn't have anywhere else to be. A tired couple sharing a plate in silence. A man nursing a whiskey at the bar, staring at his phone like he hoped it might start talking back. A woman near the window scrolling through old photos, her coat still on. She moved between them quietly, refilling water glasses, offering polite smiles that didn't invite conversation. Tonight wasn't about tips. It was about getting through the hours without thinking too hard about where everyone else in the world was. The bell above the front door chimed. She glanced up automatically and froze. A man stood in the doorway, snow clinging to the shoulders of his dark coat. Tall, broad. Still in a way that made the room seem suddenly smaller. He didn't step inside right away. Instead, he looked back over his shoulder, then down. A little boy clung to his hand. The child couldn't have been more than 5 or 6. He wore a thick winter jacket zipped all the way to his chin, a knit hat pulled low over dark curls. His free hand twisted into the fabric of his father's coat like he was afraid it might disappear. The man bent slightly, murmuring something she couldn't hear. The boy shook his head and pressed closer. Something about the scene tightened her chest. They stepped inside together. The door closed behind them with a soft thud that echoed louder than it should have. The conversation at the bar stopped. The tired couple fell silent. Even her manager looked up from his paperwork. The man's presence filled the room without effort. He didn't look around the way most guests did. He didn't hesitate. His gaze swept the restaurant once, measured, assessing, before settling forward again. He chose a booth near the back, one with a clear view of the entrance and the windows. Of course he did. She grabbed 2 menus and approached, smoothing her apron as she went. Up close, he was even more imposing. Dark hair neatly cut, sharp features softened only by the way his hand remained firmly wrapped around his son's. "Good evening," she said gently. "Merry Christmas." The man nodded once. "Thank you." His voice was low, calm, controlled. The boy didn't look at her. His eyes stayed fixed on the table as he slid into the booth, still gripping his father's hand like a lifeline. She placed the menus down slowly, careful not to crowd him. "Can I get you something warm to start? Hot chocolate? Tea?" The man glanced at his son. "Would you like that?" The boy didn't answer. She knelt slightly, lowering herself so she wasn't towering over him. "We have marshmallows," she said softly. "The good kind." The boy's fingers tightened, then stilled. He peeked at her. Just for a second. Dark, wary eyes met hers, searching, measuring. Something shifted. His grip on his father loosened just a little. The man noticed immediately. His gaze snapped to his son, then back to her, sharp and unreadable. "Yes," he said after a moment. "That would be good." She smiled, small and careful. "I'll be right back." As she walked away, she felt it, the weight of the man's attention on her back. Not predatory, not threatening, curious. She poured the hot chocolate slowly, hands steady despite the strange awareness crawling up her spine. When she returned, she set the mug in front of the boy, then slid a handful of marshmallows onto a small plate beside it. The boy stared at them like they might vanish. "You don't have to drink it yet," she said quietly. "It's hot." He nodded once, and then, hesitantly, his small hand reached out. Not for the mug. For her. His fingers wrapped around hers, tentative but firm. She stilled, heart skipping. Across the table, the man went completely still. And in that moment, standing in a nearly empty restaurant on Christmas night, a frightened child clinging to her hand, she understood something she couldn't yet explain. This shift was about to become something else entirely. The boy didn't let go of her hand, not even when his father gently tried to ease his fingers away. The man's touch was careful, restrained, as if he were afraid of breaking something fragile. The boy shook his head, curls bouncing beneath his hat, and tightened his grip instead. "It's all right," she said softly, before the moment could harden into something awkward. "I don't mind." The father studied her for a long beat, then gave a single nod. He didn't thank her. He didn't apologize. He simply accepted it, as if he'd learned long ago that drawing attention to fear only made it louder. She straightened slowly, careful not to pull away too quickly. The boy followed her movement with his eyes this time, watching like he was bracing for her to disappear. "I'm just going to grab a spoon," she told him quietly. "I'll come right back." She loosened her fingers just enough for him to understand, then stepped away. When she returned, she didn't stand. She crouched beside the booth instead, lowering herself until her eyes were level with his. She noticed everything then, the way his shoulders hunched forward, the way his knees were pulled tight against his chest, the faint tremor that ran through him whenever a dish clinked in the kitchen. He didn't look at her face. He focused on her hands. "Is it too loud?" she asked, keeping her voice low. No response. She glanced toward the kitchen door. "I can ask them to keep the door closed. It echoes." The boy's fingers flexed slightly. That was answer enough. She stood just long enough to speak quietly to her manager, who raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. A minute later, the door stayed shut, the metallic sounds muted. When she returned, the boy's shoulders eased a fraction. The father noticed. Of course he did. "You don't have to," he began. She shook her head gently. "It's okay." The boy finally lifted his eyes to her face, just briefly, close enough for her to see the shadows beneath them, too dark for a child his age, too tired. She set the spoon beside the mug, then slid a folded napkin toward him. Inside, she'd tucked one extra marshmallow. "For later," she whispered, as if sharing a secret. The boy stared at it, then at her. His grip on his father loosened for the first time. Slowly, cautiously, he reached for the napkin. A chair scraped softly somewhere behind her. The boy flinched, hand freezing mid-air. She reacted without thinking. She raised her free hand slightly, palm open and still, not touching him, but present. Solid. "It's okay," she said. "Just someone standing up." He watched her mouth as she spoke, eyes tracking every movement. After a moment, his hand lowered again. He tucked the napkin close to his chest like something precious. She exhaled quietly. The father leaned back in the booth, eyes dark with something that looked dangerously close to pain. "He doesn't speak much," the man said quietly. She didn't ask why. "That's okay," she replied. "Some people don't like words." The man studied her face, searching for judgment, finding none. "He used to," he added after a pause. "Before." She nodded once, understanding far more than she said. The boy dipped the spoon into the hot chocolate, careful, deliberate. A drop splashed onto the table, dark against the white napkin. He froze again, panic flickering across his face. She reached out slowly, deliberately, and dabbed the spill with another napkin. No fuss. No commentary.
"There," she murmured. "Fixed."
The boy stared at the clean table, then at her, eyes wide. A corner of his mouth twitched. Not a smile. Not yet. But close. The man's gaze sharpened, locked onto that tiny movement like it might vanish if he blinked. She became aware of him watching her, not with suspicion, but with something heavier. Recognition. As if he were seeing a door crack open where none had existed before. "Do you like dinosaurs?" she asked suddenly, nodding toward the small embroidered patch on the boy's sleeve. The boy's eyes flicked down to it, then back up to her. He nodded. Her smile widened just enough to be encouraging. "I used to have a Triceratops toy when I was little. He was green and missing a horn." The boy considered this, then lifted one finger and held it up. "One?" she asked. He nodded again. Her heart squeezed. She stayed there with them, crouched beside the booth, talking softly about dinosaurs and hot chocolate, and nothing at all. The boy ate slowly, his movements careful but no longer rigid. His hand never left hers, but his grip relaxed. And across the table, the man who terrified everyone else in the room sat utterly still, watching his son breathe easier for the first time in a very long time. Something quiet and irreversible was happening, and none of them could stop it now. The change in the room was subtle, but unmistakable. It wasn't loud or dramatic. No raised voices, no sudden movement. Just a quiet awareness that settled over the restaurant like a held breath. People spoke more softly. Chairs scraped a little less. Even the clink of cutlery seemed to dull, as if the space itself had learned restraint. She noticed it when she stood. As she straightened from her crouch beside the booth, she felt eyes on her back. Not curious glances this time, measured ones. The tired man at the bar had stopped scrolling through his phone. The couple near the window had leaned closer together, whispering. Even her manager lingered longer than necessary near the kitchen door, watching. All of it centered on the man sitting across from his son. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't demanded anything. He hadn't even moved much at all. But there was something about him, something in the stillness, the precision of his movements, that warned people without words. Danger lived comfortably in his skin. She returned to the counter to check on another table, but her awareness never fully left the booth. She felt it when the man's gaze followed her across the room. Not possessive, not predatory, attentive. Like he was tracking the one variable he couldn't afford to lose. When she passed by again with a tray of plates, she caught the whisper. "Who is that?" one of the servers murmured behind the bar. "Don't know," another replied, eyes darting toward the booth. "But I wouldn't ask." Her manager frowned. "Just do your jobs." They did, carefully. She approached the booth again to check on their meals. The boy sat closer to his father now, his shoulder pressed lightly against the man's side. But his posture was different, less rigid. His free hand rested on the table, fingers brushing the folded napkin she'd given him like a talisman. "How is everything?" she asked softly. The man looked up at her. Up close, his eyes were darker than she'd realized. Not cold, sharp, evaluating. The kind of eyes that missed nothing and forgave little. "Good," he said. "Thank you." His son dipped his spoon into the mug again, careful not to spill. When it did slosh slightly, he glanced at her instead of freezing. That alone made her chest ache. She smiled at him. "You're doing great." The man saw that too. "What's your name?" he asked her suddenly. She paused. It wasn't an aggressive question, just direct. She told him. He repeated it once, quietly, like he was committing it to memory. "I'm Matteo," he said. "And this is my son." The boy's name followed, spoken gently, reverently, as if saying it out loud mattered. She nodded, acknowledging both of them. "It's nice to meet you." The boy watched the exchange intently, his eyes flicking between them. A plate shattered in the kitchen. The sound cracked through the restaurant sharp and unexpected. The boy flinched hard, ducking his head and grabbing his father's coat. Matteo reacted instantly, One arm came around his son, solid and secure, pulling him close without urgency. His other hand rose slightly, not in threat, but command. The kitchen went silent. "It's okay," Mateo murmured, his voice low and steady. "You're safe." The boy pressed his face into his father's chest, breathing fast. She moved without thinking, stepping closer to the booth. She didn't touch the boy. She didn't intrude. She just spoke. "That happens sometimes," she said quietly. "It startled me, too." The boy's breathing slowed. Mateo's gaze flicked to her, something intense and unreadable burning behind his eyes. "You don't need to," he began. "I know," she said gently. "I want to." That stopped him. Slowly, the boy lifted his head. His eyes found hers again. This time they didn't dart away. Mateo noticed the shift. He leaned back slightly, allowing his son space without letting go entirely. The room exhaled. Across the restaurant, people returned to their conversations, but the tension didn't fully leave. It lingered like an unspoken rule. This man was not to be crossed. And yet, here he was, seated quietly in a half-empty restaurant on Christmas night. His entire focus narrowed to two things: his frightened son, and the woman who'd somehow become the child's anchor. She placed the check discreetly on the table, careful not to rush them. Mateo glanced at it, then back at her. "You're very good with him," he said. She shrugged lightly. "He's easy to care about." The truth in the statement hung between them. Mateo studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded once. "Yes," he said quietly. "He is." And in that moment she understood why people feared him. Not because he was cruel, but because he was capable of absolute loyalty and absolute destruction toward anything that threatened what he loved. And somehow, without realizing it, she'd stepped directly into the center of that. Dinner unfolded slowly, as if the night itself had decided not to rush them. She brought out the plates one by one, careful to set the boys down first. Chicken cut into neat, manageable pieces. Mashed potatoes shaped into a small hill, a pool of gravy in the center. Nothing overwhelming. Nothing that demanded too much at once. The boy stared at the plate like it was a puzzle. "It's okay," she said softly. "You can take your time." Mateo didn't speak. He didn't rush his son or encourage him to eat. He simply watched, his presence steady, his hand resting lightly on the edge of the table, near the boy's arm. Slowly, the boy picked up his fork. The first bite took a long time. He lifted it carefully, pausing halfway to his mouth, as if waiting for something to go wrong. When it didn't, he chewed slowly, thoughtfully. Then, almost imperceptibly, his shoulders dropped. She noticed it. Mateo noticed it. The boy took another bite. Conversation around them faded into background noise. Even the kitchen seemed quieter, as if the staff had learned the rhythm of the table and adjusted around it. She checked in on them occasionally, but she didn't hover. Each time she returned, the boy was a little more relaxed, his movements less stiff, his gaze less guarded. At one point, he pushed his plate slightly forward, then pulled it back again, uncertain. "Do you want more potatoes?" she asked. He glanced at his father, then back at her. A small nod. Her heart squeezed as she brought him another spoonful. When she set it down, he didn't flinch. He didn't cling. He simply smiled at the plate. It was small, barely there. But Mateo saw it like a miracle. He froze, fork hovering mid-air. The smile didn't last long. It flickered and disappeared, like the boy wasn't sure he was allowed to keep it. But it had existed. Mateo lowered his fork slowly, his jaw tightening. "This is the first time he's eaten without watching the door," he said quietly. She glanced up, surprised. "Really?" He nodded once. "In years." The weight of that pressed down on her chest. She thought of the way he'd chosen the booth, the way his son flinched at every sound. the constant vigilance woven into both of them like muscle memory. "He's very brave," she said. Mateo's eyes softened, just a fraction. He shouldn't have to be. Dinner continued. The boy began to hum under his breath as he ate, a soft, tuneless sound that made her pause mid-step. He didn't seem to realize he was doing it. It just happened, like a reflex returning. Mateo closed his eyes briefly. She came back with dessert menus, but before she could speak, the boy looked up at her and pointed. "Cake," he said. The word was quiet, hesitant, but it was a word. The table went still. Mateo's head snapped up. His eyes locked onto his son, disbelief flashing across his face so raw she felt like she'd intruded on something sacred. "You want cake?" Mateo asked carefully, as if the sound might shatter. The boy nodded again, cheeks flushing. She smiled so hard her face hurt. "We have chocolate," she said, "and vanilla." "Chocolate," the boy said, louder this time. She turned away before either of them could see her blink back tears. When she returned with the dessert, she set a small candle beside it, unlit. Not to overwhelm, just enough to make it feel like something special. "Would you like to light it?" she asked. The boy hesitated, then nodded. She struck the match carefully, shielding the flame. The boy watched, eyes wide, as the candle flickered to life. Mateo leaned back in his seat, his hand coming up to cover his mouth. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He just watched his son lean forward, mesmerized, his fear momentarily forgotten. Snow continued to fall outside the windows. The restaurant glowed softly. Time seemed to stretch. "This," Mateo said quietly, voice rough, "is the most normal Christmas dinner we've had since his mother died." Her breath caught. "I didn't know," she said gently. "You weren't supposed to," he replied. "But you gave it to us anyway." She met his gaze across the table, something heavy and unspoken passing between them. This wasn't just a meal. It was peace. And as she cleared the plates later, she felt it settle into her bones. A certainty she couldn't shake. This night was already changing something, and none of them would leave it the same. The plates were cleared, the check paid without ceremony, and the quiet rhythm of the restaurant began to return to something resembling closing time. Chairs were stacked near the walls, the kitchen lights dimmed. Christmas night was slipping toward its end. She brought a small paper bag with leftovers and set it gently on the edge of the table. "For later," she said, smiling at the boy. "In case you get hungry again." The boy nodded solemnly, then glanced at his father, as if waiting for permission to accept something good. Mateo nodded once. She straightened, smoothing her apron. "I should let you get going," she said. "Drive safe." Mateo stood, reaching for his coat. The boy slid off the booth slowly, his movements careful, like he was bracing himself for the world to come rushing back in the moment they left this warm pocket of peace. The front door opened somewhere behind her. Cold air crept in, sharp and unwelcome. The boy flinched. She reacted without thinking, stepping closer. "It's okay," she murmured. "Just the door." He looked up at her then, eyes wide and searching, and before she could prepare herself, his small hand reached out and grabbed hers. Not tentative, not hesitant. Desperate. His fingers curled around hers with surprising strength, his grip tight and unyielding. Like letting go might make everything disappear. The room went completely still. She froze, heart hammering. Mateo stopped mid-motion, his coat halfway over his shoulder. His eyes dropped to where his son clung to her, then lifted slowly to her face. The boy shook his head, curls bouncing, his grip tightening further. "No," he whispered. The single word hit her harder than anything else that night. She crouched slightly, careful not to pull away. "Hey," she said softly. "What's wrong?" The boy didn't answer. He just held on, pressing closer, his small body trembling now that the moment of leaving had arrived. Mateo exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening. This This was the moment he'd been bracing for without knowing it. "I'll carry you," he said gently, reaching down. The boy shook his head harder, his grip nearly painful now. "No," he repeated. Mateo stilled. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't a tantrum. This was fear, raw and unfiltered. She looked up at Mateo, searching his face. She saw the conflict there immediately. The instinct to protect. The instinct to pull away. The knowledge of what his world demanded versus what his son was asking for in this moment. "She can't come with us," Mateo said quietly, more to himself than to the boy. "It's not—" The boy's eyes filled. His lower lip trembled. Her chest ached. "It's okay," she said gently, addressing Mateo as much as the child. "I don't have to go anywhere. He just needs a moment." Mateo met her gaze, something sharp and pained flashing across his face. "You don't understand?" "Then help me," she said softly. The boy leaned into her leg, pressing his face against her coat like it was the only solid thing left in the room. Mateo closed his eyes briefly. This wasn't supposed to happen. Distance was how he kept people safe. Distance was how he survived. He had built his life on controlled spaces and clean exits, on never letting anyone become indispensable. And yet here was his son, asking for something he couldn't order or buy or intimidate into existence. "Papa," the boy whispered. The word shattered him. Mateo opened his eyes. He looked at the restaurant, the quiet tables, the woman kneeling in front of his child, offering comfort without expectation. He looked at the small hand wrapped around hers like an anchor, and he made a decision. "Put your coat back on," he said quietly. She blinked. "What?" "To him," Mateo clarified, nodding toward his son. "We're not leaving yet." Relief flooded the boy's face instantly. His grip loosened, just a little. But he didn't let go. Mateo crouched beside them, his presence solid and controlled despite the storm behind his eyes. "You can stay a little longer," he told his son. "But just a little." The boy nodded, clinging to her hand like it was a promise. Mateo straightened, meeting her gaze. "You didn't ask for this," he said quietly. "No," she agreed. "But I don't regret it." Something unreadable passed across his face. Neither did he. And as the boy continued to hold her hand, refusing to release it, Mateo realized the truth he'd been avoiding all night. Distance was no longer an option. Not when his son had finally found something worth holding on to. Mateo didn't argue. He didn't command. He didn't explain himself to anyone watching. He simply reached for the edge of the table and sat back down. The motion was calm, deliberate, so understated that it took a moment for the weight of it to register. Chairs had already been stacked nearby. The kitchen staff had begun wiping surfaces, the end-of-night routine humming quietly in the background. And yet, with that single movement, the rhythm of the room shifted again. She felt it. The boy felt it too. His grip on her hand loosened just enough to relax, his shoulders sinking as if a tight cord inside him had finally slackened. He stayed close, but the panic drained from his small body, replaced by something tentative and fragile. Mateo leaned back against the booth, one arm resting along the seat behind his son. He glanced at the boy, then at her. "Would you like dessert?" he asked his son gently. The boy hesitated, then nodded. "Cake," he said, quieter this time but steady. Mateo lifted his gaze to her. "Chocolate," he added. She blinked, caught off guard. Of course. She stepped away slowly, half expecting someone to stop her, to remind her they were closed, that Christmas night was ending, that this moment couldn't be extended simply because one powerful man willed it. No one did. The kitchen came alive again without complaint. Plates were pulled out. A slice of cake was dressed carefully, as if this weren't an afterthought but something that mattered. When she returned, she placed the dessert in front of the boy first. He smiled again, just a little, and that was all it took. Mateo watched his son eat, the flicker of candlelight reflecting in his eyes. He didn't touch his own dessert right away. He watched the way the boy relaxed, the way he leaned slightly toward her instead of clinging, the way he looked up at her like she was part of the room's structure now, like something reliable. "This doesn't happen," Mateo said quietly. She glanced up. "What doesn't?" "Peace," he replied. "Not like this." She didn't know what to say to that. So she didn't say anything. She simply stayed, refilled water, wiped the table when a crumb fell, moved slowly and deliberately so nothing startled the fragile calm. The boy took another bite of cake, then paused. He looked at her, eyes serious. "You stay?" he asked. Her chest tightened. "Just a little longer," she said softly. He nodded, satisfied, and returned to his dessert. Mateo's gaze hardened, not at her, but inward. This was the dangerous part. Not the men who feared him, not the enemies who watched for weakness. This was danger because it was quiet, because it felt good, because it asked him to choose something that couldn't be controlled once it was invited in. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and typed a single message. "Stand down, cancel pickup. I'll call when ready." The reply came almost instantly. "Understood." He set the phone face down again. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly, noticing the movement. "I know. Your son is the reason I am doing this." The honesty in his voice made her breath hitch. He picked up his fork at last, cutting into the cake without looking at it. "You didn't force your way into our lives," he said. "You didn't ask for anything. And yet," he stopped, choosing his words carefully, "you changed the temperature of the room." The boy laughed softly at something she said, a sound so rare Mateo almost forgot to breathe. "Christmas isn't over," Mateo continued, more to himself than to her. "And neither is this." "This?" she echoed. He met her gaze then fully. There was no threat in his eyes, no manipulation, just resolve. "My son needs consistency," he said. "He needs someone who doesn't disappear the moment the door opens." Her heart pounded. "I work here. This was just—" "A beginning," Mateo said, "whether you intended it or not." The boy finished his cake and pushed the plate away, then leaned sideways and rested his head against her arm. He didn't ask. He didn't explain. He simply did it, trusting that she would be there when he settled. She stayed perfectly still. Mateo watched the moment carefully, cataloging it like something precious and dangerous all at once. He understood power. He understood risk. He understood what it meant to claim something and defend it. And in that quiet restaurant, on Christmas night, with his son finally at peace, he made a decision that had nothing to do with control and everything to do with loyalty. This woman wasn't leaving their lives, not because he demanded it, but because his son had already chosen her. And Mateo had never ignored a truth that clear. The restaurant had emptied almost completely by the time Mateo spoke again. Only one table remained occupied near the window, voices low and distant, the world shrinking until it felt like it existed solely within the warm circle of their booth. The boy leaned against her now, his head heavy on her arm, breath slow and even. Sleep hadn't taken him yet, but something close to it. Rest without fear. She hadn't moved in a long time. Mateo watched them in silence, his expression unreadable. The danger that usually clung to him like a second skin was still there, but quieter now, turned inward. "You don't have to stay," he said at last. She glanced down at the boy, then back at Mateo. "He's comfortable." "Yes," Mateo's voice was low. "That's the problem." She waited. He took a slow breath. He wasn't always like this. Her heart tightened. "I guessed." Mateo's gaze drifted to his son, softened by something that looked almost like grief. "His mother died 3 years ago." "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "So am I." He paused, but that wasn't what broke him. She felt a chill despite the warmth of the room. "There was an attempt," Mateo continued. "On me. They missed." Her breath caught. "They didn't miss him." She stilled completely. He survived, Mateo said. Physically. Her mind struggled to reconcile the small, trembling child beside her with what Mateo was saying. He doesn't remember everything, Mateo went on. But his body does. Sounds, sudden movement, doors opening, men he doesn't know. She thought of the clattering plate in the kitchen, the way the boy had flinched, the way his eyes tracked exits before anything else. He hasn't spoken much since, Mateo said. Doctors call it selective mutism, trauma response. They tell me to be patient. And you are, she said. Yes, Mateo agreed. But patience doesn't erase memory. The boy shifted slightly, murmuring something unintelligible, his fingers curling into her sleeve. She resisted the instinct to pull away. Mateo noticed. That, he said quietly, isn't something he does. With anyone? With anyone. The weight of that pressed down on her chest. You live like this, she said softly, all the time. Yes. Always watching. Yes. Always expecting something to go wrong. Mateo met her gaze. Because something always has. She swallowed. And trust? He gave a faint, humorless smile. Trust is a liability. She thought of how carefully he'd chosen the booth, the way his men hovered without being seen, the way he'd watched her from the moment she knelt beside his son. You didn't trust me, she said. No, he said honestly. I evaluated you. And now? He didn't answer immediately. The boy stirred again, eyes fluttering open. He looked around, panic flashing briefly, until his gaze landed on her. His breathing steadied instantly. Mateo's jaw tightened. That, he said quietly, is why this is dangerous. Because he trusts me, she said. Yes. And you're afraid I'll leave. Yes. Shiti hesitated. Are you afraid I'll hurt him? Mateo's eyes darkened. I'm afraid of what happens if you disappear. The truth of it settled between them, heavy and raw. I didn't mean to become important, she said. I know, Mateo replied. That's why you are. The boy lifted his head slightly, looking between them. Papa? He murmured. Mateo leaned closer immediately. I'm here. The boy studied his father's face, then looked back at her. His small hand reached out again, resting on hers, not gripping this time, just touching. He feels safe, she said quietly. Mateo nodded. And safety is something I've never been able to give him fully. Not without walls, not without guards. She looked at the child, at the softness returning to his features. Sometimes safety isn't walls, she said. Sometimes it's predictability, gentleness. Someone who doesn't disappear when the door opens. Mateo absorbed her words in silence. I don't know how to offer him that, he admitted. Not without risking everything else. She met his gaze, and I don't know how to walk away knowing he needs it. The boy yawned, resting his head back against her arm. His eyes closed fully this time. Mateo watched him sleep. This life, he said quietly, doesn't allow softness. She didn't look away. And yet here it is. Yes, Mateo thought. Here it was. And now that it existed, neither of them could pretend it didn't matter. Trust had entered the room without permission, and it was asking for everything. The boy slept fully now, his breathing deep and even, his small hand still resting against her arm as if it had always belonged there. The restaurant lights were dimmed further, the world reduced to quiet hums and the soft glow of Christmas decor waiting to be packed away. Time felt suspended. No longer night, not yet morning. Mateo watched his son for a long moment before he spoke again. When he wakes up, he said quietly, he will look for you. She felt a tightness in her chest. I'll still be here. Yes, Mateo agreed. Then his gaze lifted to hers. But tomorrow? The question lingered between them, heavy with implication. She didn't answer right away. She didn't know how. Her life before tonight felt distant now. Early shifts, late buses, quiet apartments, the careful loneliness she'd learned to carry without complaint. It had never felt dramatic, just small. Mateo leaned back slightly, giving her space without withdrawing. "I'm not asking you to decide anything this second," he said. "But I won't pretend this is nothing." She let out a slow breath. "Then tell me what it is." His jaw tightened, the weight of calculation settling over him like armor. "I want you to come with us," he said. "Not tonight, not as an obligation, as a choice." Her pulse quickened. "Come with you? How?" "I have a home outside the city," he said. "Quiet, secure, predictable. My son spends most of his time there now." "And you?" she asked. "I'm there when I can be." A pause. "More than I used to be." She studied him, hearing what he wasn't saying. "You're asking me to leave my job?" "Yes." "My life?" "Yes. To step into yours," she finished. He nodded once. "I won't lie to you. My world is dangerous. You've seen a fraction of it tonight. There will be rules, boundaries, protection that doesn't feel subtle." "And what do I get?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm inside her. Mateo met her gaze without hesitation. "You would never have to wonder if you're safe. You would never have to worry about money or work you don't love or whether someone will look out for you." "And the danger?" she asked quietly. "It comes with me," he said. "Whether you accept this or not." She swallowed. "You're offering me safety by standing closer to it." "Yes." Silence settled again, thick and thoughtful. "And your son?" she asked. "He would have consistency," Mateo said. "Someone who doesn't disappear between visits. Someone he trusts." "That's a lot to put on one person." "I know." His voice softened. "That's why this is a choice." She glanced down at the sleeping boy, at the way his brow was smooth now, untroubled. "What if I say no?" Mateo didn't flinch. "Then I make sure you're protected anyway. You go back to your life. I don't interfere." "And he?" she asked. Mateo looked away for the first time. "Then I find another way." The honesty hurt more than any persuasion would have. She thought of the fear she'd seen in the boy's eyes, and the calm that followed when she stayed. She thought of Mateo's constant vigilance, the exhaustion behind it, of a future she'd never imagined for herself, standing at the edge of something enormous and terrifying and meaningful. "You're not asking me to pretend this is easy," she said. "No." "You're not promising it will be safe." "No." "But you are promising—" she hesitated. "That you won't be alone," Mateo said. "That if you step into this, you will matter. To him. To me." Her breath caught. She'd spent years making herself useful but invisible. Easy to replace. Easy to forget. This was the opposite. "When do you need an answer?" she asked. Mateo glanced at his son, then back at her. "Soon," he said, "but not tonight." Outside with old Sinush. The first pale hint of morning brushed against the windows. Christmas night was ending. She looked at the man across from her, the danger, the devotion, the impossible choice wrapped into one, and realized something terrifying and undeniable. This offer wasn't something she could ignore. Because whatever she chose next would shape 3 lives, and walking away would be the hardest choice of all. The boy woke slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. At first, there was only a soft shift of weight against her arm, a quiet inhale that trembled before it steadied. Then his fingers moved. Searching. Not frantic. Careful. As if he were checking whether the world he'd fallen asleep in was still there. She didn't move. She'd learned, instinctively, that sudden changes unsettled him. So she stayed exactly as she was. Her arm relaxed, her breathing slow and even. His fingers found her sleeve. They curled into the fabric, gentle but certain. Mateo noticed immediately. He'd been watching his son the way he always did, alert even in stillness. But this time, something in his posture shifted. He leaned forward slightly, eyes fixed on the small hand clutching her arm. The boy's eyes opened. For a brief moment, fear flickered there. The instinctive scan, the tightening of his shoulders. His gaze darted to the door, then to the shadows beyond the windows. Then he looked at her, and the fear melted. Not all at once. Not dramatically. It softened, drained away in layers, replaced by something quieter and more profound. Relief. He pushed himself upright, still holding on to her, and leaned into her side like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Hey," she whispered. "You fell asleep." He nodded. "You had cake dreams," she added gently. A corner of his mouth twitched. Mateo's chest tightened. The boy shifted again, glancing briefly at his father, just a glance, checking. But he didn't move toward him. He stayed where he was, tucked close to her, his body language loose and unguarded. It was the choice that undid Mateo. Not rejection. Trust. The boy reached for her hand this time, threading his fingers through hers with quiet certainty. No desperation. No fear of abandonment. Just preference. Mateo swallowed hard. He had spent years trying to be everything at once. Father, shield, wall, weapon. He had given his son safety measured in guards, and distance, and silence. He had taught him vigilance, because the world demanded it. And yet here was his child, choosing softness, choosing her. "She's here," Mateo said softly, more to himself than anyone else. The boy nodded again, eyes already drifting back to the warmth of her presence. She brushed a thumb gently over the back of his hand. Not soothing, not corrective. Just there. Mateo saw it then, the subtle difference. This wasn't distraction. This wasn't temporary calm. This was regulation. Safety settling into the boy's nervous system in a way no locked gate or armed guard ever could. "You don't flinch when he touches you," Mateo said quietly. She glanced up. "Why would I?" "Most people do," he replied. "They're afraid they'll do something wrong." She looked back down at the boy, who was now tracing the seam of her sleeve with focused curiosity. "He tells you what he needs," she just said. "You just have to listen." Mateo leaned back, the weight of that simple truth pressing into him. He had been listening for threats, for danger, for the sound of footsteps where they shouldn't be. He hadn't been listening for this. The boy yawned, then looked up at her again. "Stay?" he asked quietly. Her heart squeezed. "I'm still here." Satisfied, he leaned back against her shoulder, his small body fitting there like it had always belonged. Mateo closed his eyes briefly. This was what he hadn't known how to give. Not safety from the world. Safety within it. She's not just calming him, Mateo realized aloud, his voice rough. She's teaching him that the world can be quiet again. She met his gaze. "And you?" His eyes flickered, exposed for a split second. "I forgot what that felt like." The admission hung between them, raw and honest. The boy hummed softly, a low, content sound. His grip on her hand relaxed, but present. Mateo watched them, something shifting irrevocably in his chest. This woman wasn't a temporary solution. She wasn't a kindness he could thank and send away. She was becoming a constant. A place his son returned to not out of fear, but out of trust. And for the first time since everything had gone wrong, Mateo allowed himself to believe that healing didn't always come through force or vigilance. Sometimes it came quietly. Sometimes it chose you first. And once it did, you didn't let it go. Morning arrived softly, like it was afraid to disturb what had taken root overnight. The restaurant lights had been dimmed to their lowest glow hours ago, the last tables cleared, the last chairs stacked. Outside, the sky had shifted from ink dark to pale gray, the snow reflecting the earliest hints of dawn. Christmas Day had come quietly, without celebration or ceremony. She stood near the window, her coat folded over her arm, watching the street wake up. Delivery trucks rolled past slowly. A lone jogger moved through the snow, life resuming as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Behind her, the boy slept again, this time curled against his father's side in the booth, his small body relaxed in a way that felt new. Mateo sat still, one arm draped protectively around him, his other hand resting on the table. He hadn't slept. She could see it in the set of his shoulders, the sharpness of his gaze softened now by exhaustion and something else. Hope. "You should go home," Mateo said quietly, breaking the silence. She turned, surprised. "I thought—"
"I know what I said," he interrupted gently. "And I meant it. But I won't hold you here out of gratitude or obligation."
She studied him, the man who had terrified a room without raising his voice, now choosing his words with care. "You're not holding me," she said. "I'm still here." Mateo's eyes darkened. "You don't owe us anything." "I know." The boy stirred then, his eyes fluttering open. For a brief moment, confusion crossed his face, until he saw her. Relief settled instantly. "You stay," he murmured. She knelt beside him, brushing a curl from his forehead. "I'm still here," she repeated. Mateo watched the exchange, something tightening in his chest. He stood slowly, shrugging into his coat. "Come with us," he said simply. She didn't pretend she hadn't been expecting it. "Not as a demand," he continued, "as a beginning." She glanced at the boy, who watched her intently, hope written openly across his face. Then back at Mateo, whose gaze held both danger and devotion in equal measure. "What happens after?" she asked. Mateo exhaled slowly. "After, we figure it out. Together." The word felt deliberate, weighted. She nodded once. "Okay." Mateo didn't smile. He didn't celebrate. He simply accepted the answer like a man who understood the gravity of promises. They left the restaurant together as dawn broke fully across the sky. Cold air greeted them, sharp and clean. Mateo lifted his son easily, settling him against his chest. The boy wrapped his arms around his father's neck, then reached one hand out for her. She took it. A black car waited at the curb, unobtrusive but unmistakable. The driver stepped out, nodding respectfully. Mateo paused before opening the door, turning to face her fully. "Once you step into this," he said quietly, "people will notice. Some will resent it, others will test it." "And you?" she asked. "I will protect what is mine," he said, then softer. "And what my son chooses." Her breath caught. She climbed into the car. The boy leaned against her immediately, his head resting on her shoulder as if it had always belonged there. Mateo watched the moment carefully, something fierce and unyielding settling into place. The car pulled away from the curb, as Christmas morning spread across the city. She thought of the shift she'd dreaded, the quiet restaurant, the small, gentle choices that had led them here. She hadn't just served Christmas dinner. She had been seen, chosen, by a child who needed safety, by a man who understood power, but was learning trust. As the city passed by outside the window, she realized something with startling clarity. This Christmas hadn't just changed her life. It had given a father permission to believe his son might finally be safe. And it had given her a place she wasn't meant to leave. Not quietly, not ever.